When this young mother offered her seat to an elderly veteran, she simply thought she was doing a kind thing. She switched seats with him and took a seat behind him in a row of chairs. However, she accidentally discovered his identity and turned pale. This could not be true. Emma Bright and her daughter Rosie had been sitting in their assigned seats on the airplane for almost an hour. The plane was delayed on the runway for unknown reasons, which annoyed Emma. They were going to be stuck on the ground for longer than the actual flight. Emma spoke softly, but then an elderly man approached. Immediately, Emma's irritated expression softened. She assumed the pilots were waiting for this elderly man to arrive. He looked ancient and moved slowly, but he also had a kind smile that softened her heart. However, this was before she realized who he was. The elderly man took a seat in the row behind Emma and her daughter. Emma smiled politely and returned to holding her daughter close. A young woman, Emma, was traveling on a plane with her baby. She noticed that an older man who was sitting behind her was making strange noises and seemed to be in discomfort. Emma turned around and asked if he was all right. The man responded that he was fine, but that old bones and lack of legroom were causing him some discomfort. He also mentioned that his weak bladder meant he might need to use the restroom during the flight. Despite this, Emma decided to offer the older man her seat in the front row, which had more legroom and was closer to the exit. She felt that it was the right thing to do, even though it meant she and her baby would be sitting in the front. The elderly man graciously accepted the offer, and Emma's act of kindness earned her some respect from the other passengers on the plane. Places. The veteran was surprised by her suggestion and hesitated to accept it. However, Emma insisted, and he eventually agreed to move to her old seat. The veteran thanked Emma, but she said there was no need, not knowing that her biggest gift was yet to come. While switching seats, Emma read the inscription on the man's hat, which indicated he had served in not just one but 2 wars. A true hero, Emma thanked the veteran for his service to this country. Before taking a seat behind him, something very interesting happened. Emma was staring out the window from her new seat when a sound came from the airplane seat in front of her. It was the sound of pages turning. The pages sounded heavy, as if they were a reading book. Emma was curious and decided to peek through the gap in the backrest. She saw the old man looking through a thick photo album. The pages were quite yellowed, indicating that the book was old. The images presented on the pages of the book were at least a few decades old, but they were beyond beautiful. Emma saw multiple black and white photos of soldiers in the field. The young mother put 2 and 2 together and figured that they must have been his wartime comrades. Emma felt a warm feeling of compassion well up in her heart, but then it screeched to a halt when she heard the veteran's voice. During his look-through, he said, "Are you okay?" Emma asked. The man assured that he was fine and continued his look-through. This happened until he stopped at a specific page. This choice made Emma turn pale instantly. The curious mother was still secretly watching and admiring the man's album, and then she saw a picture that changed everything. Emma gasped for air out of pure shock and covered her mouth with her hand to avoid making any further sounds. The young mother became too restless to stay seated in her chair, so she walked to the row where the veteran was sitting. She tapped the shoulder of the woman who was sitting next to her. "Excuse me, is it okay if we switch seats? I really need to talk with this person." The woman looked at Emma's empty seat next to the window and agreed, as she had planned to sleep for the entire flight. Emma was glad she agreed and sat down next to the veteran. The veteran was confused by Emma's decision to switch seats again. It didn't help that his restless mother looked at him with wide eyes. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, scanning Emma's puzzled face. Emma replied by asking about the book the man was holding. "What is this book, sir?" The man wasn't secretive about his album and showed Emma some pages of the book. "I fought in 2 major wars for my country. The first was in 1945, when we invaded Normandy during World War II, and the second war I saw was in Korea. These are pictures from those times," the man continued, telling Emma more about his experiences. Detailed accounts of those events, he spoke of the battles and shared with Emma the stories of his fellow soldiers, whom he regarded as his closest friends for most of his life. War creates an unbreakable bond, as you know. Emma sat there quietly listening. But that was not all, because with each page he turned in his book, Emma's eyes widened a little more. The old veteran thought that this was because she found his stories fascinating, and this was partially true, but the real reason was because he came closer to that particular page again. "Can I see one photo, please?" Emma asked. Emma explained the photo she had seen before, and the old man knew exactly which one she meant. He flipped through a few more pages of paper, and then something strange happened. The photo was revealed, and Emma immediately began to cry softly, even hugging the old man for some reason. She wiped away a few tears and asked the veteran to tell her more about the photo, which the man did gladly. During the flight, the veteran shared intimate stories about the people in that particular photo, and with every detail revealed, Emma's expression grew more emotional. After about an hour, the plane landed and the veteran thought their pleasant time together was over, but Emma had other plans. She asked the elderly man to follow her into the airport's departure hall, where she needed to show him something. "Please trust me," and to Emma's surprise, the elderly man did. Emma, her daughter, and the veteran entered the departure hall together and were greeted by a middle-aged man. Emma ran to him, announcing that he was her father, who had come to pick her up. "Just a moment," Emma said to the veteran, before whispering something in her father's ear. When Emma did this, her father had the same emotional reaction. On the plane, tears filled the man's eyes as he asked the veteran about his business in their city. The veteran explained that he had been asked to give a college hearing the next day about his experience in war. That's why he brought his photo album and wore his veteran's hat. Both father and daughter nodded and asked the veteran if he had some free time. They had something important they wanted to show him. What was it? The veteran replied, but according to Emma, it was a surprise. The veteran was hesitant. Yes, he had some time to kill, but following a relative stranger to an unknown destination was not what he had planned for before his flight. The veteran scanned Emma's face again and saw a careful smile as she wiped another tear. There was something trustworthy about her, and in the end, it was that trustworthy face combined with her interest in his life that made the difference. The veteran agreed to accompany them, and they stepped into Emma's father's car. After that, they drove away from the airport and past a hotel where he was supposed to stay. The car quickly traded the busy cityscape for a quieter suburban environment. Trees filled these streets, and small, cute houses lined the concrete pavement. The veteran asked once more where they were going, but again, Emma did not provide a clear answer. "We're almost there. Please trust me," she simply said. Emma also said that the old man would enjoy their surprise for him, but if he knew what it was, it would spoil his reaction. "I'm sorry for my secrecy, but your wait is over. We're here." The car stopped in front of the smallest house in the neighborhood. It was old but homely. Emma and her daughter had already gotten out and were opening the front door. The veteran exited the vehicle. "What is this place? Why am I here?" the old man whispered to himself, but Emma simply invited him inside. Extending his arm and gesturing for the veteran to come closer, the veteran realized that turning around would be a waste, so he simply took one step after another until he stood inside the house's hallway. The house had a 1960s feel to it, with orange curtains hanging in front of the windows and a light musky scent filling the air. However, the interior of the home was not the reason why he had been invited. The old man looked ahead and saw Emma and her father standing beside a large chair in the living room, which was facing backwards. The veteran saw that someone was seated inside it. Emma ducked down and talked to the person sitting, but the veteran could only see the top of the gray-haired individual's head. After Emma finished speaking, the seated person stood up and faced the veteran, revealing that it was an elderly man of at least the same age, but who this person was remained a mystery. The mysterious elderly man looked up at the veteran, squinting his eyes. The man's eyes seemed to be analyzing him, but after a few puzzled glances, they widened, just like Emma and her father's had before. The elderly man approached Charles and gave him a tight hug. Charles stood frozen as the man cried and squeezed his body. Charles was about to roll his eyes when the grip loosened, and he saw the man's face up close. Recognition hit him instantly, and Charles began to cry. Charles hugged the man back and started asking questions. He had many questions, mostly for Emma, since she had started this journey. How did the man know who he was when they were on the plane? Emma smiled and said that the answer to his question was simple. She left the room and returned with an item she covered with her hands. The man he was hugging was her grandfather. "I have heard many stories about a man who saved my grandfather's life during his time in the U.S. Army. This man, Charles, was my grandfather's best friend, and according to him, he would not be alive today without Charles's help. My father and I would also not exist without him." Emma, my daughter, said in an emotional tone, "Thank you for all that you did for my grandfather during wartime." She then revealed that she knew Charles was the right man from the start, as she had the same photo in her possession that Charles had in his album. It was Grandpa's most prized possession, a reminder of his best friend who he thought he had lost, but it turned out that was not the case. When I saw the photo on the plane, I instantly recognized Charles and knew that we had to reconnect. You too, Charles, were stunned by Emma's story. He couldn't believe that such a simple moment could lead to such an amazing reunion. He thanked Emma from the bottom of his heart and promised to repay her somehow, but Emma didn't need repayment. "You have already done enough," she said. Charles nodded and placed his photo album flat on the table. He ruffled through it and revealed the page with the photo of the two of them together. "Do you remember that day?" William, the 93-year-old, nodded as his hand caressed the photo. Charles continued the conversation and stated that they were indeed best friends during wartime, each other's backs, and Charles confirmed that he had saved Emma's clumsy grandfather multiple times in the heat of battle. However, during their last mission, something went wrong. A minefield lay between them and the enemy, and Charles watched as William crossed it. With courage and determination, Charles marched with the other troops, but as he neared the end of the battle, a massive explosion occurred. Charles never saw his friend again after that, and he believed that William had been blown to pieces on that day. In wartime, it is always a difficult time when a soldier goes missing, and when there is no news of them for a long time, it can only mean one thing: a silent soldier is a dead soldier. Charles stated this, but apparently, that was not the case. How on earth did he survive that explosion? Charles asked his friend's grandpa. The grandpa described the battle as a blur. He remembered crossing a field and almost reaching the other side safely, but then one of the soldiers beside him stepped on a mine, causing the explosion. The next thing he remembered was waking up in the field hospital. The grandpa was not directly hit by the blast, even though it looked like it from afar. Charles nodded, saying that he had thought he had lost his friend. On that day, William's friend arrived at the hospital after the debris from the explosion had caused some injuries. He had scrap metal in his leg, and as a result, he was deemed unfit for combat. After that, he was sent home and never returned to the war. Once my commanding officer informed me that we had lost the battle and that the entire battalion had been wiped out. "I thought I had lost you too," William said to his friend Charles, but apparently, none of that was true. The two friends hugged each other again and felt a renewed bond. They were old men with a lifetime of stories to catch up on. So the two veterans spent the rest of the day talking, smiling, and reminiscing about the good old days. It was an amazing sight, and Emma was happy to see her grandpa smile again. It had been a long time since she had seen such joy on his face. Since that moment, in William's home, the two men had become irreplaceable again. They even spent Christmas together that year.